Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Insights with Experts. Joining us here today, we are very fortunate to have Mr. Henry Langdon. Now, Henry is the founder of Udamon. Now, Udamon is a platform which enables career starters and changers to shape their decisions in life. And it's something that we're going to be learning a lot about in this interview as well. Essentially, Henry, the first question which we'd like to ask you, it's essentially an overview. I told everyone watching what Udamon is from a very macro kind of view. Could you maybe tell us what made you want to actually start this? What made you want to, maybe one day wake up and say, you know what, I want to create Udamon? What did that actually look like, I guess?
Yeah, so it's Udamon's could have arisen over a number of years of kind of feeling frustrated with the lack of advice available for predominantly young people to make their own decisions on their own terms about their future. I mean, my background has been in education, so I've designed and run various educational programs that have taken mainly teenagers from a place of kind of school to university and career kind of pathways. And whilst I'm very proud of all the work I've done, I've long felt frustrated that it would be much better if we were giving people the tools and know-how and vision to make their decisions on their own terms. So, our family and social network remain the most influential factors on our career planning and choices. We look at, the world of work at the moment. We've got employee disengagement and turnover rising amidst a fast-changing careers landscape. So it's clear that limited access to really dynamic and evidence-based careers support is harming individuals because they're finding themselves in jobs that perhaps they're not well suited to, and also they're lacking the kind of thinking tools and knowledge and wisdom to kind of really interpret their situation so they can move forward in a productive way. And it's also harming industry because you have small companies, will be worse affected by this, people going into jobs that they're not really engaging their full capacity and strengths with. So Udamon really responds to this need by helping career starters and changers, in light of recent events, to take greater ownership of their professional direction and development so they can make an impact where they're most needed. And currently we seek to achieve this through our What Path program, which is a practical and philosophical online career guidance course. It's entirely self-directed, and the program equips participants with a meaningful understanding of how they can use their strengths and preferences to seek and prepare for career opportunities that they can excel at and that they're likely to find fulfilling. So that's the kind of, I suppose, the wide angle view on kind of where Udamon sort of situates itself.
Yeah, this service that Udamon is actually offering now, would you say this is something that you wish you had potentially when you were, I don't know, maybe like my age and so on? So is this really like something that you thought, oh, okay, I wish I had this? Well, I didn't have that chance, so maybe I'm going to allow students now younger than me to have that chance. Is it?
Yeah, spot on. I mean, it was, the based on my experiences navigating the early stages of a kind of 21st century career journey, and what if I was, I've always been an employee in education institutions, so if I was in charge of this institution, what would I want the young people, in my kind of care and sort of direction to receive support wise. So yeah, it's completely, I found it very tricky to identify, what I wanted to do with my life once I'd left university. And I went down a lot of different kind of tangents. And there are certainly things that I wish I'd known, that this course very much kind of puts front and center, in people's thinking. But even if, it's definitely, there's definitely information there that is relevant to someone perhaps in, my position in their early 30s who's thinking about what they want to do with their lives as well, because they might not have had the space and the time to kind of think and explore these questions at great depth. And by sort of nature, I'm very, I'm reading every day. I'm up at 5 a.m. to at least get an hour and a half reading in every single day. And I'm thinking about that reading in podcasts and Audible, all sorts of sort of sources that I've sort of synthesized into this course based on that kind of personal experience of the challenges of a career journey, that professional experience of advising people on what to do with their futures and the kind of frustration of the inadequacies of that system, and then my kind of personal preference for looking at wise thinkers, cutting edge research in sort of social sciences, and what the kind of experiences of me and my peers and people I admire have kind of taught us all about what's important.
Yeah. And I just want to stay on the topic of Udamon as well. And, one thing which I often get asked, having named the current projects which I'm working on, names like Discern, names like Orakui, one of the main questions people always ask me is, Sean, what on earth is Orakui? And so, you know what, I'm going to now not be on the receiving end of that. And I'm going to now ask you, Henry, what does Udamon actually mean? And is the philosophy of the word something that you try to carry in this course?
Yeah. It's funny. I remember when I saw the name to see, I immediately had the inclination that it's got to be something classical. So that was I felt that was a real good point of kind of an indicator of a shared wavelength there. So so Udamon has kind of two derivations. The first one is, so I've made it up. It's my own word. Like it doesn't. You can't find it in a dictionary. But it's derived from the ancient Greek concept, kind of championed by Aristotle, eudaimonia. And eudaimonia, there's, like anything, it has a number of different kind of interpretations of what it actually means. But for me, and kind of the interpretation that I most gravitate towards, and the one which we kind of explore kind of explicitly and implicitly in depth through the What Path program, eudaimonia is a fulfillment that comes with engaging your strengths in the service of causes or missions that you care deeply about. So that's what I kind of had front and center when I was thinking about Udamon, was how can I enable young people to really get themselves in the front and center of work that really draws on their strengths and really engages their passion, for the things they care about. So it's not always about, perhaps when we say meaning, we're thinking about things we care about. We're thinking about kind of maybe social impact, and it definitely does mean that, but it also can mean things like, we want there to be more technological innovation in the world, or I want there to be more compassion for this particular group, whatever it might be. That's your mission and your strengths of what are you going to bring to that mission to make an impact and to make, add your value and contribute. But there's the other kind of derivation which kind of comes from eudaimonia, is that ancient Greeks had a kind of a belief that they had, kind of similar to, I think we have it in sort of, I don't know, in the UK and the West, there's the good and sort of the devil on your shoulder and the angel. They had a similar kind of concept, but it was the kind of angel, so to speak, was called a eudaimon, and that was their kind of guiding conscience. What was the, everyone from even someone as sort of ostensibly sort of rational and skeptical as Socrates had one, and for him it was, what is the best decision that I can make going forward in reference to the kind of principles of eudaimonia, and your eudaimon would be there telling you, what they thought would be the best decision to make. So it's got that kind of element as well to it. We're sort of trying to create those sort of really supportive, encouraging, and ambitious voices in our heads to come to the fore.
Right. Yeah. And it sounds like when you're talking about eudaimonia, it's something that I guess students really have to take into account when they apply for certain careers, jobs, when they have to decide what road they're going to take. I guess that relates in very nicely into this next question, which I'd like to ask you, which is essentially all about that. It's all about essentially young people choosing, right, which path should I take, A, B, C. And one of the main, some of the main factors students often take into account, things like wealth, things like social impact, things like social status. How will you be viewed? I mean, there are numerous things. I could keep naming it. So I wanted to ask you, what would you say perhaps is that one key thing young people should be taking into account if they choose a specific path?
So I think in terms of kind of sources, I suppose sources of career satisfaction, um, wealth, status, whatever, social impact. I mean, that's ultimately going to be very subjective. And so it's not, I would never say to someone that you need to prioritize social impact or you need to prioritize money, or that's completely contingent on that individual's kind of priorities and constraints, and the kind of conditions they find themselves in. So I would say if you had to distill something down to one piece of advice, I'd probably take a step back from those kind of different factors and actually say, I think above all, the most important thing when considering which path to take, and this is abstract. I mean, we would go into more detail, but it was you and I talking about your priorities and ambitions. But so, on a general principle that I think applies to everyone is avoid speed at all costs. So I think most problems when it comes to decision making about your future come from an emphasis on the need to make speedy decisions and to make speedy progress. And I would say instead, think much more about what's the kind of destination that you're wanting to reach in the next, let's say 4 years, and that destination should be abstract because there'll be a number of different ways of realizing it, and also you've got to kind of have a lot of flexibility for events to kind of distort what you think you want to do, where you want to be in 5 years time. So I would say have a destination type in place, something like in 5 years time I want to be in a position of financial stability and a certain level of autonomy with how I choose to spend my time, and I want to be using my creative skills as much as possible. So that's a vague destination which can be realized in a number of different ways, and you work back from there into more concrete goal setting on how you're going to progress towards that outcome. And with that destination in mind, you can move forward instead of speed, which is dangerous because you make bad decisions and you rush things and you can end up actually going nowhere quickly. You move forward with velocity, which is different to speed in that it measures displacement. So you're actually moving from where you are now to somewhere that is going to be categorically different to where you might go if you rush things and you sped things along. I mean, I think the analogy here is that the turtle and the hare. That's why the tortoise won the race, because he moved forward with consistent, steady progression without losing the sort of destination. So, to return back to kind of your question, sorry, because I can never give a kind of sort of silver bullet answer because they don't exist. I think it's very much avoid speed and focus on thinking about where exactly you want to be in a number of years' time, and then taking paths which enable you to get closer to that destination. But that destination, this is critical, has to remain abstract because you just don't know what's going to be in the world in 5 years' time in terms of challenges and obstacles, and you don't know who you are going to be in 5 years' time. So that abstraction enables it to be adapted and to be modified as you develop and events develop. But it's still a concrete ideal because you're saying you want to be somewhere else, somewhere further along than you are now, which is critical.
Yeah, and that's really, really interesting because I've actually been asked very, very like lately when people saying, "Oh, Sean, where do you see yourself in 5 years from now? Where do you see yourself in like 10 years from now?" And honestly, what I always talk about, I use the example of like a software engineer, like 40 years ago, something like that. I mean, for example, a software engineer is currently the most demanded job in the world. 40 years ago, who knew what that was? What students were saying, "Oh, I want to be a software engineer when I'm older," and that change has only exponentially become faster. I mean, now with AI, cryptocurrency, all these things which are like emerging now, who knows like what on earth is going to be the main job in 10 years from now? So yeah, so I could really, really relate on with that point that you were talking about in terms of not being too specific. So yeah, I mean, with that, staying in that topic in terms of like choosing our paths and so on, one other massive factor that many students have to take into account is the anxiety from, opinions from influential figures, high stakes, all these things that students have to take into account. And this often makes, career choices one of the most difficult parts of a student's life. So I wanted to ask with that, what advice do you have for students to potentially mitigate how anxious they feel in these specific moments when they're making these choices?
Great question. I think I just want to preface it with the fact that anxiety is not something you can kind of extinguish. So it's always going to be there to some extent. I think you can take steps in your thinking and actions that can definitely, like you say, mitigate and kind of moderate it, the extremities of it. I again, this would always have to be individual, sort of specific to some extent. But I'd present a couple of points here. One is actually that type of goal setting that we just referenced, we talked about. In my experience, has really helped a lot of people with their anxiety because it takes the pressure off. Because if you say you want to be in 5 years' time, I want to be this particular thing or in this particular place, then that really puts you on a very narrow path, which is also very future focused, and so you can get yourself into a situation when you're constantly worrying about how far you haven't basically progressed towards that goal, or how slowly you're progressing towards that goal, and that can cause a great deal of worry and anxiety. So goal setting which recognizes the importance of long-term ambitions, but also recognizes the fact that those long-term goals are going to have to be modified and sort of changed as you progress towards them based on the way the world's sort of changing. So you take the pressure off, basically. So you can focus your actions and your decisions on what's immediately in front of you on each moment of impact, then that can take the pressure off, your expectations of where you should be or where you should be going. And I think the other key point here is to really embrace uncertainty. So really enjoy the upside of uncertainty, which is surprise and delight at how things turn out in unexpected and unusual ways. So I often use this example when I'm talking to people about there's a great kind of Zen parable. I don't know if it's about a sort of an ancient Chinese farmer, and he I'll say it as quickly as possible, but it's just a great kind of example. He's a Chinese farmer with a bunch of horses, and one horse that runs off, and his horse is a key pivot of kind of his kind of livelihood, and so that's a big shame. And his fellow villagers come up to him and say, "Well, God, your horse has run away. What a tragedy. How are you going to cope? And how bad?" And he goes, "Well, maybe." And then the next day, the horse returns, and it's brought with him for more horses. So now suddenly he's got a boon of horses. He's got many more horses than he did the day before. And the villagers come up to him as great fortune and say, well, how lucky, this is going to be hugely beneficial for you. And he replies, maybe. And the next day his son is trying to kind of break in some of these wild horses that his horses brought back, and one of the horses bucks him off and he breaks his leg. And the villagers come up to him and say, gosh, what misfortune, your son is now going to be holed up for months, and you're going to have to tend to your crops sort of without his help, and how bad. And he goes, well, maybe. And then a week later, a group of soldiers comes into the town and demands that all young men of a particular age enlist to fight in a kind of regional war that's beginning to unfold. And obviously his son can't get drawn into this battle because he's got a broken leg. And the villagers go, oh, what fortune that he's been saved by this event. He's been saved from going to war. And he goes, maybe. And you can see the logic. It's this idea of suspending judgment as events unfold, and not expecting things to turn out the way you think they will do, because they very often don't. And we're terrible at predicting the future, and that has its downsides in terms of potential shocks and disruptions. But if you can maximize the upside of that things are always going to turn out differently to what you expect, and that there's a huge amount of excitement and joy that can come from that. And that these setbacks are far often nowhere near as bad as you think they will be, and nowhere near as bad. They never turn out as badly as you think they will do when they happen. It takes the pressure off. But I think that, to go back to your original question, that the really key thing is to not have these very concrete long-term goals that put a huge amount of pressure on you to achieve them. And put you at odds with the kind of the vicissitudes of reality and things changing so quickly and rapidly, and embrace kind of present action and embrace opportunities which enable you to draw on your strengths and preferences right now. And who knows where those things will take them. But if you can focus on that task immediately in front of you, whatever that opportunity is, and bring your A game to it and bring your best to it, it's going to lead to exciting opportunities and exciting tangents. And without that very concrete goal that you're aiming for, you can have a very flexible and open-minded approach to new opportunities. And I'm sure you've had examples in your, certainly with your entrepreneurial projects, of having an idea of where you wanted something to go, and then it not really panning out that way, and actually that being a better thing because that created new opportunities that you couldn't even see were there. I think that, another analogy here is that if you walk into a room and there's a door at the other end to your right, you're not going to be able to see through that door until you walk straight up to it, and then you can turn right and see through it. I think there are so many opportunities that are like that are at the end of the room. You can't see them there, but when you get there, they're going to give you a totally different perspective on what's in front of you, which you couldn't have anticipated.
Yeah, of course. And I would even argue that these unexpected moments that we come across, very often it makes us stronger as well. Very often we can actually make the most out of it. I was reading Jeff Bezos. So at every Amazon financial report, what he does is he writes a one-page letter in the start of it. He's been doing it since like 1997, since they started, and he essentially reflects on the entire year. And in one of the most recent ones, what he put was a quote, and he was talking about COVID-19, and essentially when he talks about the fact that when we face hardships, we have a choice to either let that hardship overcome us, or we can overcome it and we can actually make the most out of it. We can allow for, that hardship to make us stronger. And with COVID, that's what we're seeing now. We're seeing a lot. I mean, yes. Why have the top 1% accumulated something like trillions more during COVID? I mean, arguably yes, because lots of them are in tech. But at the same time, you also could argue that they found ways to make the most out of it. And I mean, yes, I'm saying that Jeff Bezos, he's very optimistic about the entire COVID thing, because obviously Amazon is one of the top companies that are going to obviously thrive in a pandemic like COVID. But at the end of the day, really, it comes down to how you're going to view a specific situation. So yeah, so I really, really find that interesting. And I want to keep talking about that actually, because actually what I found here in Australia is, what they're starting to enact are these kinds of laws and like taxes, like these nudge systems where they want to nudge students out of arts fields, out of law fields, English fields, and perhaps into more science, tech, STEM, math-based fields, because obviously that is what the future really entails. So I wanted to ask you, like, what would you then say to, I guess, a student who wants to take something like English, who wants to go into something like art, and genuinely enjoys that, however, is being nudged not just by the anxiety of their parents, but by the anxiety of literally society, who's telling them, look, you have to pay a higher price if you take arts now. So how would you perhaps, what advice would you give to a student, I guess, in those shoes?
So I think first up, you've got to kind of play the field in front of you. So regardless of who's nudging you where, you've got to have a really wide vision on what opportunities are out there, and typically we like to simplify the world and we like to reduce the world to our kind of preoccupations and assumptions, and that's true for parents, governments, individuals. And I think as someone looking for opportunities that are going to engage their strengths, I think you've got to have a really kind of wide-eyed view on what's really out there. So and you often find that it's not as simple as there's only jobs in tech, or there's only STEM jobs are the only route to sort of a career stability and kind of security, although those are problematic times anyway, but at least career opportunity. I would then say start to think laterally. So your skills can be used in a sort of a number of different ways that aren't necessarily immediately obvious to you in a number of different contexts. So, for example, certainly, because you use the example of tech, let's just focus on that. I mean, communication and storytelling and empathy are critical components of that world's success. And so that's something, those are qualities that someone, to use your example, someone with an English background has a very strong and nuanced grasp on. So you can look for opportunities within those spaces that engage and draw in your strengths that might not be the most kind of obvious ones, but they're certainly there. And then I would say, and I would definitely stress the importance of focusing on opportunities that are going to engage your energy and your enthusiasm, and so give you that kind of momentum to probably skill up in areas that you are less skilled in at the moment based on your kind of present day experiences. So find those opportunities that, yes, draw on your strengths and have some sort of symmetry with kind of what you are currently good at, but make sure that those opportunities also provides, be basically cognizant and aware that those opportunities that, if you're into them and interested in them, you can start to skill up in those areas where you are less confident. And there are plenty of technical skills that you could learn on the job once you've kind of got that kind of opportunity in place. And then finally, just be very open to the facts, kind of like theme that's coming through this conversation, that there are lots of assumptions about yourself that you have got wrong, that you want to go out and test basically. And there are lots of things about yourself that you don't know yet that are only going to come about through experience. So again, go and test those assumptions and be confident with the fact that you can develop skills and develop your kind of professional capacities whilst you're on the job. And finally, don't let other people make decisions for you, and have that confidence to back yourself, because ultimately it's going to be you doing that 40-hour week wherever it is, and it's important that it's going to be energizing you and helping you grow in confidence and widen your kind of scope of opportunities available to you. So yeah, that would be, again, a few things I would sort of say, but we would definitely expand on any of those points in more detail.
Yeah, I mean, a story which immediately comes to my mind with that story is actually, I think it was the 8th interview I think we had, and it was with this lady called Jo Tyra, and she's currently in Singapore right now. She's originally from the UK, but essentially in uni she read Spanish and French, I think it was. And after that, so, she goes into uni and studies languages and all this stuff. And then she comes out of uni, and then she's thinking, okay, what can I then use this degree with? What kind of job can I actually have here? And she was told, oh, you're either going to become like a translator, you're either going to go work at a French ski resort or anything like this. So she's being told by other people what like niche options she has. And, I mean, what I'll do is I'll quickly tell you the end of that story now, and then I'll quickly tell you how that happened. But if we look at her now, she's currently running, a IT firm in Singapore, and a very, very successful IT firm right now in Singapore. So you can see how somebody who went into languages is now, in the heart of STEM. Essentially how that happens is, she was saying when she was in interviews, even though she didn't have any experience in tech or IT or sales or anything like that, she didn't sell people on what was on her, education, on what she specialized in. She sold people on herself, on, the cross transferable skills that she had, and so on. And she did all kinds of things. And I'll tell you one story that she told me actually at the end of that interview. I've been telling people the story ever since, because I mean, I love it. Like, she was being interviewed for this one job, and it's her in a lobby. She's got like 15 other people in there, and they all know they're interviewing for the exact same job. And in that lobby, they can see that room which they're going to enter and they're going to get interviewed in. And so nobody's being called in. They're waiting around there for some time. And what she does is she walks up to that room, takes off a shoe, puts a shoe in the door, and just walks back down, sits on the chair in the lobby again. And after 5 minutes or so, the person in that room, which was supposed to interview her, sees that shoe, picks it up, walks out onto the lobby, says, right, everyone, why is there a shoe in my office? What's happening here? And then he opens up what's inside that shoe, and he sees that it's a note. And what that note says is, now that I have my foot in the door, will you let me in? And so from there, she actually ended up being the one person in that entire room who actually got that job. So it's these kinds of skills which you can essentially, you don't have to take STEM to learn, which can make you a valuable component of a firm. So yeah, I just thought I'd maybe tell that quick story.
Yeah, I mean, that's brilliant, and I think that what that also speaks to is the sort of creative thinking and courage, and an understanding of kind of how to kind of make an impression, in a given situation. And that those are all, again, skills that come from non-technical subject background. So yeah, that's a brilliant anecdote.
Yeah. And she even says that now. She even says that, the people that she hires are those that she can remember the most out of a room of 40 people. She said, she doesn't matter what it is, make yourself remembered in some kind of way, whether it's if you submit like a video CV or anything like that. And I think, that's like exactly what we've been talking about this entire time. But yeah.
Yeah. It reminds, there's a concept that I came across recently called, well, not a concept, but maybe like a sort of theory, called Excaptation, and it's the kind of a kind of a term from biology that speaks to basically certain functions that evolved for one purpose being used for a totally different purpose, based on kind of the necessity of time. And so, like, the classic example is feathers. Feathers weren't originally there for flying; they were there for warmth and perhaps color. They think dinosaurs might have had very colorful tails for feathers for sort of courting purposes and all the rest of it. They had no relationship with flying. It was only later that they started showing their use as a kind of key component of critical component for flying. And so they didn't, the critical thing is they didn't change for a new use. Like the feathers didn't change; they're exactly the same. They changed use, and that's because the context changed. And that's the thing, is you'd be surprised by what different uses your skills have in different contexts. So if you can, you don't need to adapt your skills per se. You just need to find different contexts to bring them into a different sort of use. So there's a lot that speaks to that. The theme in that story you just told, which is brilliant. So yeah, exaptation over adaptation.
Awesome. So yeah, Henry, I'm going to ask the final question now, and this is the exact same question that I ask literally everyone which I interview. Essentially, what this question is, I mean, it's quite a simple question, but it's often a little bit harder to answer. And it's, if you could leave the youth with just one piece of advice, what would that one piece of advice actually be?
I think I've probably already given it away earlier on when we were talking about what your priorities should be when thinking about your career. I might just have to reiterate what I said earlier, which is avoid speed at all costs. Almost all problems come from an obsession with speed as something that we should have in our lives when it really isn't. And instead choose velocity. So choose progression towards something that you have yourself chosen as a destination, whatever that might be. Whether that be, in 5 to 10 years time, I want to be an entrepreneur or someone who's doing entrepreneurial work, or in 5 to 10 years time, I want to be in a position of financial stability and professional freedom. If you have these kind of destinations in mind, and then you can work back from there and make your decisions in a very methodical, cool-headed and calculated and centered. When I say centered, is in centered on what your priorities and strengths are. Centered way, you'll go far. And if you can, and you'll watch everyone else rushing and falling into things that they're not good at, or following kind of the advice of what they should do based on influential others, whilst you make that steady, consistent, and forward focused progression towards that destination, you'll go far.
Thanks for listening in. This podcast has been brought to you by Desare, a platform designed to bridge the gap between the youth and professional. You can read more about us at desare.org, and you can also check out the section titled Insights with Experts, where you can submit your questions that you might have for future experts and industries that you would like to learn more about. And you can also refer in any experts that you might know yourself.